The Amazon rainforest covers over 2 million square miles. Within that vastness, death comes in packages both large and small. But it's often the smallest creatures that carry the most concentrated horror. The deeper you venture into the green cathedral of the jungle, the more you realize that size means nothing here. Danger doesn't announce itself with roars or obvious threat displays. Sometimes it gleams on the back of something no bigger than your fingernail. The golden poison dart frog measures barely 2 inches long. Its skin shimmers with colors that seem almost artificial, brilliant yellows and oranges that look like they were painted on by an artist with a taste for warning signs. And that's exactly what they are, warnings. Because pressed into the pores of that delicate skin is batrachotoxin, one of the most potent natural toxins ever discovered. A single frog, one small enough to sit comfortably in the palm of your hand, carries enough venom to kill 10 grown adults. Indigenous hunters understood this. They would collect these frogs carefully, heating their skin to extract the poison, then coating their blow dart tips with the viscous result. A scratch from one of those darts meant paralysis. It meant your muscles would stop responding. It meant your lungs would forget how to breathe. All from something you might mistake for a child's toy. And these frogs don't hunt. They don't chase prey or inject venom with fangs. They simply exist, soaked in death, waiting for something foolish enough to touch them. The terrifying part? They're not trying to kill you. The poison is purely defensive. But in the Amazon, defense and offense blur together into the same lethal equation. As night falls across the rainforest, the golden frogs settle into silence. But something else wakes up. Something that does hunt. The Brazilian wandering spider earned its name honestly. It doesn't build webs and wait like most spiders. Instead, it roams. It walks across the forest floor with a disturbing confidence, those 8 legs carrying a body that can span the width of your hand. During the day, these spiders hide in dark places, in tree hollows, under fallen logs, sometimes in boxes of fruit destined for shipping containers. But at night, they emerge and wander through the undergrowth, searching. Their venom is neurotoxic. A bite delivers an intense, searing pain that spreads through your limbs like fire through dry wood. But the pain is just the beginning. The venom interferes with your nervous system, causing muscle spasms, difficulty breathing, and a loss of muscle control. Victims report overwhelming nausea and profuse sweating. Some describe a sensation of their heart trying to beat its way out of their chest. And in certain cases, the venom causes a medical condition so bizarre that researchers initially struggled to believe the reports. But it's been documented repeatedly. The wandering spider carries the forest's cruelty in its fangs. Yet somehow, these spiders aren't even the largest ones hiding in the Amazon's shadows. Goliath bird-eater tarantulas grow to terrifying proportions in the deeper parts of the rainforest. Their leg span can exceed 11 inches, wider than a dinner plate. When one of these creatures spreads itself across a tree trunk at night, it looks less like an animal and more like a dark stain that has somehow learned to move. They're heavy too. A full-grown bird-eater can weigh as much as a small puppy. You can hear them walking. On a quiet night, their footsteps make a soft clicking sound as those thick legs tap against wood or leaf litter. Imagine hearing that in the darkness, knowing something the size of your face is approaching, but not being able to see where it is. Despite their name, these tarantulas rarely eat birds. They prefer easier prey, insects, frogs, rodents, but they are capable of taking down small birds if the opportunity presents itself. There,
Fangs, which can grow up to an inch long, are powerful enough to puncture skin with ease. The venom isn't particularly dangerous to humans, but the bite is traumatic, simply because of the mechanical damage those fangs inflict, like being stabbed with two rusty nails. And if threatened, the bird eater has another defense. It uses its back legs to flick tiny barbed hairs from its abdomen. These hairs float through the air and embed themselves in exposed skin and eyes, causing intense itching and irritation that can last for days. But if you're careful, if you watch where you step and don't disturb the trees, you might avoid the spiders. The next creature, though, it will find you. The bullet ant earned its name from victims who compared the pain of its sting to being shot. Not a minor gunshot wound, not a graze, but the full, devastating impact of a bullet tearing through flesh. Scientists measure insect pain using something called the Schmidt Sting Pain Index. Most bee stings register around a 2 out of 4. The bullet ant scores a perfect 4. It's the highest level, the ceiling. And people who've been stung describe the pain as waves of burning, throbbing agony that radiates up the entire limb. It doesn't fade quickly either. The pain can last for 12 hours, sometimes longer, pulsing in time with your heartbeat. Bullet ants are large for ants, nearly an inch long, and they nest in trees. But they patrol the forest floor constantly, mandibles open, antennae twitching as they search for food and threats. Their colonies can be aggressive, particularly if disturbed. And here's the nightmare scenario that keeps researchers careful when working in bullet ant territory. These ants sometimes nest in trees that lean over trails, brush against the wrong branch, and dozens of ants can rain down on you, already agitated, already prepared to defend their colony, each one capable of delivering that gunshot pain. Multiple stings at once can cause fever, vomiting, and cardiac arrhythmia. Some indigenous tribes use these ants in initiation rituals, weaving them into gloves that young men must wear for 10 minutes as a test of endurance. Most initiates report that the pain is so overwhelming they lose control of their limbs, shaking and crying as the venom works through their system. At least the bullet ant's pain is temporary. The next creature is more patient. In the wet undergrowth near slow-moving water, something is waiting in the mud. The tyrant king leech doesn't look like much at first, just another dark, segmented worm among thousands, but it can grow up to 4 inches long. And unlike most leeches that attach to skin and feed externally, this species has evolved a more invasive strategy. It doesn't just bite. Its mouth is lined with saw-like teeth that cut rather than puncture, and it doesn't aim for arms or legs like typical leeches. It seeks out the body's openings, eyes, nostrils, ears, the mouth, any vulnerable entry point into the soft interior of a host. Once inside, the leech attaches to mucous membranes and begins to feed. And here's where the horror truly settles in. You might not notice. The leech secretes an anesthetic in its saliva, numbing the area where it's feeding. You could have one living in your nasal cavity for days, even weeks, slowly drawing blood while you remain completely unaware. By the time symptoms appear, unexplained nosebleeds, difficulty breathing through one nostril, a sensation of something moving inside your head, the leech has often grown significantly larger, engorged with blood. Removal requires medical intervention. These leeches attach so firmly that pulling them out can cause dangerous bleeding. Doctors typically have to use forceps and carefully detach the creature's mouthparts one by one. There are documented cases of people returning from Amazon expeditions only to discover, weeks later, that they'd been hosting a passenger the entire time. The rainforest doesn't deal in fairness. It doesn't calibrate its dangers to human scale or human understanding. A centipede shouldn't be terrifying, but the giant Amazonian centipede can stretch longer than a ruler, sometimes reaching 13 inches, and its modified front legs have evolved into venomous fangs. These centipedes are aggressive hunters, fast and relentless. They prey on insects, spiders, lizards, even small snakes and mammals. There are reports of them hanging from cave ceilings, snatching bats out of the air mid-flight. Their venom is a cocktail of toxins designed to quickly subdue prey. In humans, a bite causes excruciating pain, severe swelling, and sometimes necrosis around the wound site. The flesh actually begins to die. Fever and nausea are common, and unlike many venomous creatures that are shy or defensive, the Amazonian centipede is bold. It will approach movement. It will investigate. Its numerous legs allow it to move with unsettling speed, flowing across surfaces like liquid. And those legs, dozens of them, clicking and scratching as it runs, creating a sound that, once heard, becomes impossible to forget. But some dangers in the Amazon don't announce themselves with clicks or movement. Some wait in perfect stillness beneath dark water. The electric eel isn't actually an eel. It's a type of knife fish, capable of growing over 6 feet long. And while it breathes air and must surface regularly, it spends most of its time in the murky rivers and streams where visibility drops to zero within inches. This is where the eel's evolution becomes truly alien. It navigates and hunts using electric fields, generating weak pulses that map its surroundings through echolocation of voltage. But when threatened, or when hunting, it can release a shock of up to 600 volts. Enough to stun a horse, enough to stop a human heart if delivered at the right moment. Multiple shocks in quick succession can cause respiratory failure. The muscles that control breathing seize up, leaving victims paralyzed in the water, unable to swim, unable to call for help. Drowning becomes the real danger, and the eel can deliver these shocks repeatedly, dozens of times before needing to rest. Fishermen who accidentally net these creatures have reported the shock traveling through wet nets and poles, through water itself, dropping them to their knees. The current passes through your entire body at once, seizing every muscle simultaneously. Imagine that happening while you're wading through waist-deep water, unable to see what's beneath the surface, unable to see where the next shock will come from. At least the electric eel stays in the water. The next creature doesn't have that limitation. The green anaconda is the heaviest snake in the world. While reticulated pythons might grow longer, no snake matches the anaconda's sheer mass. Large females can exceed 20 feet in length and weigh over 500 pounds, more than 3 grown adults combined. They spend much of their time in slow-moving rivers and swamps, where their bulk becomes weightless and their movement becomes silent. These snakes are ambush predators, perfectly camouflaged among floating vegetation, capable of remaining motionless for hours while prey approaches to drink. When an anaconda strikes, it doesn't inject venom. It doesn't need to. Instead, it wraps its massive body around its victim and squeezes. Not to crush bones, as is commonly believed, but to prevent breathing. Each time the prey exhales, the snake tightens incrementally. There's no air to breathe back in. The constriction is precise and patient. Death comes from suffocation, from the heart stopping when blood can no longer circulate. Anacondas have been documented taking down caimans, capybaras, even jaguars. Adult humans fall well within their prey size range. And once an anaconda has you in its coils, there's virtually no escape. The more you struggle, the tighter it squeezes. Panic only accelerates the process. But perhaps the most unsettling creature in these waters isn't native to the Amazon at all. Bull sharks have been found thousands of miles inland, far beyond the ocean where they should be. Unlike most sharks, which require salt water to survive, bull sharks can tolerate and even thrive in freshwater. They've been documented swimming up the Amazon River system, navigating tributaries, appearing in places where no shark should exist. They're aggressive, territorial, and responsible for more attacks on humans than almost any other shark species. Their ability to regulate salt content in their bodies allows them to move between ocean and river seamlessly, making them one of the few large predators that can hunt in both environments. Think about that. You're in a river, hundreds or thousands of miles from the nearest ocean, and something built for the deep sea is circling beneath you, curious, hungry, equipped with rows of serrated teeth designed to tear through flesh and bone. The Amazon isn't just dangerous because of what evolved there. It's dangerous because it welcomes danger from elsewhere, absorbing it within its muddy waters and endless green corridors. This is just the beginning. 10 facts. 10 reminders that the Amazon doesn't operate on human rules, doesn't recognize human dominance. We are guests there, tolerated only as long as we remain careful, remain aware. The forest has been perfecting its killers for millions of years. We've been visiting for merely a few thousand, and there are 90 more facts to go. The black caiman is the largest predator in the Amazon basin. Growing up to 20 feet in length, these massive reptiles can weigh over 1,000 pounds. They are apex predators in the truest sense. Nothing hunts them, but they hunt everything else. Black caimans patrol the riverbanks with an ancient patience, their dark scales making them nearly invisible in murky water and shadowed shallows. They prefer to hunt at dusk and through the night, when villagers and travelers come to the water's edge to bathe, to wash clothes, to collect drinking water for their families. The caiman's hunting strategy is devastatingly simple. It lies motionless, only its eyes and nostrils breaking the surface, perfectly positioned near places where humans regularly enter the water. It watches, it waits, and when prey steps into the shallows, when someone bends down to fill a container or wades in to cool off, the caiman explodes from the water with shocking speed. The attack is over in seconds. The massive jaws clamp down with a force of over 1,000 pounds per square inch, dragging the victim beneath the surface before they can scream. Death usually comes from drowning, the caiman holding its prey underwater until the struggling stops. Black caimans have been responsible for numerous human fatalities, particularly in remote areas where people have no choice but to use rivers for daily life. And the truly unsettling part? These attacks often happen in the exact same spots, day after day. The caiman learns the patterns of human activity, returning to successful hunting grounds with the regularity of a commuter. Communities know which sections of river are dangerous, which bends have claimed lives. But sometimes there's nowhere else to go. Sometimes the dangerous water is the only water. But at least you can see a caiman if you're careful, if you watch the water before entering. The next creature is far more insidious. The candiru is a small parasitic catfish, typically no longer than a few inches, that has earned a reputation as one of the Amazon's most feared creatures despite its size. It's translucent, nearly invisible in the water, and it's attracted to chemical traces, specifically ammonia and urea. The candiru normally parasitizes larger fish, swimming into their gill chambers and anchoring itself with backward-facing spines. Once attached, it feeds on blood. But there are documented cases, rare but documented, of candiru entering human orifices, urethras, the anus, any opening the fish can detect and access. Once inside, the candiru extends its spines, locking itself in place. The pain is immediate and excruciating. The spines create a barbed anchor that makes removal nearly impossible without surgery. Victims describe it as shards of glass embedded in the most sensitive tissues of their body. Urination becomes agonizing. In some cases, the fish dies inside the host, but the spines remain embedded, causing infection and continued trauma. Removal requires a surgical procedure where doctors must carefully collapse the spines before extraction. In remote areas without medical facilities, traditional remedies involve inserting various plant extracts to try to dissolve the fish or force it to release. These methods are rarely successful and often cause additional damage. The kangaroo is a reminder that in the Amazon, danger doesn't always come from teeth and venom. Sometimes it comes from something you can't see, drawn to you by the simple act of existing. Above the water, in the trees, another apex predator moves through the canopy with absolute confidence. The jaguar is the third largest big cat in the world, but pound for pound, it has the strongest bite of any feline. Where lions suffocate prey by crushing the throat and leopards rely on the same strategy, the jaguar has evolved a different approach. Its skull is reinforced, its jaw muscles overdeveloped for a single purpose, crushing bone. When a jaguar attacks, it doesn't aim for the throat. It bites directly through the skull. Those powerful jaws can punch canine teeth through a caiman's armored head, through the thick skull of a capybara, through a human skull as easily as biting into soft fruit. This hunting method is brutally efficient. There's no prolonged struggle, no chase, no suffocation. The jaguar's bite delivers instant death, the teeth penetrating brain tissue in a fraction of a second. Jaguars hunt both on land and in water, making them one of the few big cats comfortable swimming for extended periods. They've been observed diving beneath the surface to ambush caimans and fish. They climb trees with ease, dropping onto prey from above. They hunt alone, silently, appearing from nowhere with speed that seems impossible for an animal that can weigh over 200 pounds. Indigenous peoples of the Amazon have long feared and revered the jaguar. In many cultures, the jaguar is associated with shamanic power and the spirit world. This makes sense when you consider how they appear and disappear in the forest like ghosts, how their roar, a deep, sawing cough, carries through the jungle as both a warning and a promise. The jaguar kills apex predators. It kills other predators for prey. In a forest full of things designed to kill, the jaguar stands at the top. But some dangers in the Amazon work while you sleep, taking from you without your knowledge. Vampire bats are real, and they live throughout the Amazon basin. They're small, weighing only a few ounces, but they're specialized for a very specific diet. Blood, only blood. Their teeth are razor sharp, evolved to make quick, precise incisions in sleeping prey. The bite is so clean, so small, that victims often don't wake up. The bat lands near its target, crawls across skin with surprising stealth, then makes a small cut, usually on an extremity, somewhere with good blood flow close to the surface. Toes, fingers, sometimes the heel or ankle. Once the incision is made, the bat doesn't suck blood like a vampire from fiction. Instead, its saliva contains an anticoagulant called draculin, yes, that's the actual scientific name, that prevents blood from clotting. The bat simply laps at the wound while blood flows freely. A single vampire bat can consume about half its body weight in blood during one feeding, often spending 20 minutes to a half hour at the same wound. The real danger isn't blood loss, it's disease. Vampire bats are primary vectors for rabies in the Amazon region. Once infected, a bat's behavior changes. It becomes more aggressive, more likely to feed during the day, more likely to feed on humans rather than its preferred prey of livestock. Rabies transmitted through a bat bite is virtually 100% fatal once symptoms appear. And the symptoms can take weeks or months to manifest, long after anyone would remember or recognize the small bite mark. By the time the fever starts, the confusion, the fear of water, it's too late. The virus has already reached the brain. In the Amazon, death waits in the leaves, as well as the water. The fer-de-lance is one of the most dangerous snakes in Central and South America, responsible for more human fatalities than any other venomous snake in the region. They grow up to 6 feet long, with thick, muscular bodies covered in intricate brown and tan patterns that render them nearly invisible against fallen leaves and forest floor debris. These snakes are quick to strike when disturbed, and their venom is hemotoxic. It destroys blood cells, damages tissue, and causes massive internal bleeding. A bite from a fer-de-lance delivers a large quantity of venom through long, hinged fangs. The effect is rapid. Within minutes, the bite site begins to swell grotesquely, the tissue turning dark as blood vessels rupture beneath the skin. The venom spreads through the lymphatic system, causing pain that victims describe as molten metal being poured through their veins. Nausea and vomiting follow, then bleeding, from the gums, from the nose, sometimes from the eyes. In severe cases, organs begin to fail. The kidneys shut down first, unable to filter the destroyed blood cells. Without immediate anti-venom treatment, death can occur within hours. The fer-de-lance prefers to hunt at night, lying in ambush near trails and clearings where rodents travel. But during the day, these snakes remain hidden in leaf litter, often in places where humans work, near fields, along paths, around homes. People are bitten while clearing brush, while harvesting, while simply walking through areas they've walked safely dozens of times before. The snake doesn't flee at the approach of footsteps. It strikes from its hiding place, a blur of movement faster than human reaction time. And these snakes are everywhere. In nearly every region of the Amazon rainforest, pit vipers like the fer de lance maintain a silent, widespread presence. Different species, different colorations, but all of them equipped with heat-sensing pits between their eyes and nostrils that allow them to detect warm-blooded prey in total darkness. You could pass a dozen venomous snakes during a single walk through the jungle and never see a single one. They only reveal themselves at the moment of striking. This abundance of venom has not gone unnoticed by those who've learned to survive in the forest. Indigenous tribes have lived in the Amazon for thousands of years, developing intimate knowledge of every plant, every animal, every toxin the forest produces. Among their most sophisticated tools are blow darts, thin, perfectly balanced projectiles launched through long wooden tubes with remarkable accuracy. But the dart itself isn't what kills. It's the coating. Hunters collect poison dart frogs, carefully handling them to extract the toxins from their skin. They heat the substance to concentrate it, then dip their dart tips into the viscous poison. A single scratch from one of these darts delivers enough toxin to paralyze prey within minutes. The poison blocks nerve signals, causing muscles to stop responding. The target's lungs stop pulling air. The heart continues beating for a while, pumping blood through a body that can no longer move, can no longer breathe. It's a silent, efficient death, and it happens so quickly that game animals often fall where they stand. The hunters wait, watching from cover, until the animal collapses. Then they harvest the meat. The toxin doesn't contaminate the flesh, doesn't make it unsafe to eat. It only affects the living. But what's most remarkable is the precision this requires. The hunters must know exactly which frogs to collect, exactly how to extract the poison without contaminating themselves, exactly how much to use. Too little, and the dart merely wounds. Too much, and the concentration can penetrate through damaged skin during handling. This knowledge has been passed down through generations, refined over centuries. It represents a deep understanding of the forest's chemical warfare, an understanding that survival requires not just strength or speed, but knowledge of how to weaponize the very substances the forest uses to protect itself. In the water, another coordinated threat moves in groups. Piranhas have a reputation that exceeds reality in many ways. They're not mindless eating machines that attack anything that enters the water, but in certain conditions, particularly during the dry season, when water levels drop and food becomes scarce, they become desperate. And desperate piranhas are extraordinarily dangerous. They hunt in schools that can number in the hundreds, communicating through subtle signals, coordinating their attacks with unsettling precision. When a school of piranhas detects blood or distressed movement in the water, they converge rapidly. Individual piranhas aren't large. Most species reach only 8 to 14 inches, but their jaws are lined with triangular, razor-sharp teeth that interlock when the mouth closes. They don't chew, they bite and shake, tearing away chunks of flesh with each attack. And when dozens or hundreds of piranhas attack simultaneously, they can strip an animal to bone in a matter of minutes. The feeding frenzy is chaotic but efficient. Each fish darts in, takes a bite, and retreats while others move in for their turn. The water boils with activity, turning red and opaque with blood. The sounds are distinct and horrifying, a clicking, snapping cacophony as teeth click against teeth and bone. Locals know to avoid certain areas during certain times of year. They test the water before entering, splashing to see if the disturbance attracts attention. Because once a piranha school is in feeding mode, almost nothing can stop them. Even caimans and anacondas give them space during a frenzy. Above the piranha-infested waters, something else waits to breach the surface with explosive force. The arapaima is one of the largest freshwater fish in the world, growing up to 10 feet long and weighing over 400 pounds. These massive fish are air breathers, rising to the surface every 5 to 15 minutes to gulp oxygen. But they're also ambush predators with a territorial streak and surprising aggression. When threatened or during breeding season, arapaima have been known to launch themselves from the water with enough force to capsize small boats. The fish is covered in tough, armored scales that indigenous peoples have traditionally used as tools and scrapers. The scales are that hard. When an arapaima breaches, it's like a torpedo made of muscle and bone erupting from beneath the surface. The impact alone can shatter ribs, break limbs, or knock someone unconscious. Fishermen have been killed by arapaima strikes, the massive fish hitting with enough force to cause internal bleeding and traumatic injury. And these attacks aren't always provoked. Sometimes a boat simply drifts over an arapaima's territory. Sometimes someone wades into water where an arapaima is waiting. The fish launches upward in a blur of speed and mass, crashes into the target, then falls back into the water with a splash that sounds like thunder. By the time the victim processes what happened, the arapaima is gone, vanished back into the murky depths where visibility ends inches from your face. Back on land, in the shadows beneath logs and inside burrows, smaller hunters employ their own brutal methods. Some species of tarantulas in the Amazon have evolved a hunting strategy that borders on sadistic. They hunt frogs, mice, and other small vertebrates, not with quick kills, but with precision paralysis. The tarantula's venom isn't designed to kill immediately. It's designed to immobilize. The spider bites its prey, injecting venom that shuts down motor function while leaving the victim alive and aware. The prey can't run, can't fight, can't even move, but it can feel. The tarantula then begins feeding. Unlike spiders that inject digestive enzymes and consume liquefied tissue, these tarantulas often start eating their prey while it's still alive. They use their fangs to tear small pieces of flesh, consuming the victim slowly over the course of hours or even days. For the paralyzed animal, it must be an unimaginable horror, conscious but immobile, feeling every bite, unable to escape or even cry out effectively. This hunting method ensures the meat stays fresh. The prey is kept alive as a living food supply, preserved through paralysis until the tarantula has consumed enough to be satisfied. Then the spider moves on, leaving behind whatever remains, often a partially consumed but still technically living victim that will eventually die from the trauma and blood loss. Its efficiency taken to a dark extreme, another reminder that the Amazon operates on rules that seem designed to maximize suffering. And throughout all of this, winding through every layer of the forest, are the vipers. Pit vipers represent perhaps the most persistent danger in the Amazon. They're not rare anomalies or creatures confined to specific regions. They're everywhere, in the trees, in the leaf litter, along riverbanks, near human settlements. Dozens of species, each equipped with heat-sensing pits, each carrying hemotoxic or neurotoxic venom, each perfectly camouflaged for its particular niche in the forest. The sheer abundance means that anyone spending time in the Amazon will pass near venomous snakes, often without knowing it. Researchers have conducted studies where they mark known snake locations and then send people along trails. The subjects rarely see the snakes, even when they pass within feet of them. The snakes simply don't move, they don't flee. They rely on their camouflage and their stillness, breaking that stillness only to strike when stepped on or directly threatened. This creates a constant, low-grade anxiety for anyone working in the forest. Every log could be hiding a viper, every pile of leaves, every dark crevice. You learn to watch where you place your hands, where you step, where you sit down to rest. You learn that the forest is layered with invisible dangers, that safe passage is largely a matter of luck and attention, because the vipers are always there, patient, waiting, ready to deliver venom that can end your life or, at minimum, cause agonizing injury and permanent damage. The Amazon gives no warnings. It offers no safe paths. It simply exists, as it has for millions of years, indifferent to human presence, packed with creatures that evolved long before we arrived and will likely exist long after we're gone. But teeth and venom aren't the only threats lurking in the green darkness. Some of the most dangerous things in the Amazon are invisible. They float in the air you breathe. They live in the water you drink. They're carried by insects too small to swat away, by contact too brief to notice. The Amazon is not just a collection of predators. It's a vast, humid incubator for diseases that can destroy you from the inside out. Malaria has killed more humans throughout history than perhaps any other disease, and the Amazon basin remains one of the world's most intense transmission zones. The disease is caused by Plasmodium parasites transmitted through the bite of infected Anopheles mosquitoes that thrive in the warm, wet conditions of the rainforest. The symptoms begin subtly: fever, chills, headache, easy to mistake for flu or exhaustion. But as the parasites multiply inside red blood cells, the disease progresses into cycles of devastating fever that spike and break in waves, drenching victims in sweat before plunging them into shaking chills. Without treatment, malaria attacks the organs. The infected red blood cells clump together, blocking blood flow to the brain, the kidneys, the liver. Cerebral malaria causes seizures, coma, and brain damage. Victims can become delirious, violent, unable to recognize their surroundings or loved ones. Children are especially vulnerable. Their smaller bodies are overwhelmed faster, their immune systems less equipped to fight back. And in remote areas of the Amazon, far from medical facilities, malaria remains a death sentence for many who contract it. But malaria is just one disease among many. Chagas disease spreads through a different vector, the kissing bug, an insect that feeds on human blood at night, typically biting around the mouth and eyes. The bug defecates near the bite wound, and the feces contain Trypanosoma cruzi parasites. When the victim scratches the itching bite, they push the parasites into the wound or into their mucous membranes. The initial infection might cause mild swelling and fever, but the real horror of Chagas disease is that it's chronic and often silent. The parasites invade the heart and digestive system, where they remain for years, sometimes decades, slowly destroying tissue. By the time symptoms manifest, heart arrhythmias, enlarged heart, difficulty swallowing, severe constipation from intestinal damage, the disease has caused irreversible damage. The heart becomes so enlarged and weakened that it can no longer pump effectively. Sudden cardiac death is common in Chagas patients, and there's no cure once the disease reaches the chronic stage. Then there's leishmaniasis, spread by tiny sandflies that breed in forest floor debris. The disease comes in multiple forms, but the most visually devastating is cutaneous leishmaniasis, which causes open sores that don't heal. The sores start small, like insect bites, but they grow, becoming deep, cratered ulcers that eat away at skin and tissue. Faces can be destroyed, noses eroded away, lips consumed by the spreading lesions. The wounds become infected easily in the humid forest environment, attracting more flies, more parasites, creating a feedback loop of decay. Mucosal leishmaniasis is even worse. The parasites migrate to mucous membranes, destroying tissue in the nose, mouth, and throat. Victims struggle to breathe, to eat, to speak. The destruction is progressive and grotesque, and even with treatment, the scars remain. Permanent reminders of what lives in the Amazon's shadows, what waits in the bite of something you never saw coming. Yellow fever adds another layer of dread to the disease landscape. The virus is transmitted by mosquitoes, particularly Aedes and Haemogogus species, that thrive in the jungle canopy. Most people infected experience flu-like symptoms that resolve within a few days, but roughly 15% of cases progress to a severe toxic phase. The virus attacks the liver, causing jaundice that turns the skin and eyes a sickly yellow, hence the name. But it also causes internal bleeding. Victims vomit blood. They bleed from their gums, their nose, their eyes. The fever spikes to dangerous levels. The kidneys fail. Death comes from multi-organ failure, the body simply shutting down as the virus overwhelms its defenses. The truly unsettling aspect of yellow fever in the Amazon is the reservoir. Monkeys in the canopy carry the virus, often without showing symptoms. They serve as a permanent, mobile source of infection. Mosquitoes feed on infected monkeys, then descend from the canopy to feed on humans. You can be vaccinated, and many travelers are, but the vaccine isn't perfect. And for indigenous populations who've lived in the forest for generations, the virus remains a persistent threat. Waves of infection sweeping through communities whenever conditions align to boost mosquito populations. Leprosy, also known as Hansen's disease, exists at unusually high rates in parts of the Amazon. The disease is caused by Mycobacterium leprae bacteria that attack the nerves, skin, and mucous membranes. Contrary to popular belief, leprosy doesn't cause body parts to fall off. Instead, it causes nerve damage that leads to loss of feeling in the extremities. Victims injure themselves without noticing. Cuts, burns, infections, and the injuries worsen because there's no pain signal warning them to stop, to care for the wound. Over time, repeated injuries and infections lead to tissue damage, deformities, and eventual loss of fingers and toes through progressive decay. The face can become disfigured as the bacteria damage facial nerves and cartilage. The social stigma surrounding leprosy has diminished in many parts of the world, but in remote Amazon communities, those infected are often isolated, cast out, left to survive on the margins. And the disease spreads through prolonged close contact, making it a fixture in areas where people live in tight quarters, where sanitation is limited, where medical treatment is days or weeks away. Viral hepatitis spreads with alarming efficiency in the Amazon basin. Hepatitis A and E spread through contaminated water, a constant risk in areas where clean water is scarce and rivers serve multiple purposes. Hepatitis B and C spread through blood contact, through sexual transmission, through the sharing of tools and instruments in communities with limited resources. The liver is slowly destroyed by chronic infection, scarring and hardening into cirrhosis. Liver failure follows, jaundice, ascites, where the abdomen swells with fluid, confusion and altered mental states as toxins build up in the blood. The liver can no longer filter waste, can no longer produce the proteins necessary for blood clotting. Internal bleeding becomes common, and hepatocellular carcinoma, liver cancer, develops in many chronic hepatitis cases, a final, fatal complication of an infection that may have occurred decades earlier. The Amazon's rivers, revered for their beauty and essential for transportation and survival, become vectors for these waterborne diseases. Bathing in the river, washing clothes, collecting drinking water, each interaction is a potential exposure, and in areas where entire communities depend on the same water source, hepatitis sweeps through with predictable regularity, leaving a trail of chronic illness and shortened lifespans. Dengue fever turns the Amazon's mosquito populations into flying syringes of misery. The dengue virus causes severe flu-like illness, high fever, excruciating joint and muscle pain so intense it's called break-bone fever, headaches that feel like your skull is splitting. But dengue has 4 different serotypes, and here's where it becomes truly dangerous. If you're infected with one type and recover, then later get infected with a different type, your risk of severe dengue increases dramatically. Severe dengue causes hemorrhagic fever and dengue shock syndrome. Blood vessels become leaky. Plasma seeps out into body tissues, causing severe swelling. Internal bleeding begins in the stomach, intestines, brain. The blood pressure drops dangerously low. Organs fail from lack of oxygen and blood flow. Without immediate intensive care, the mortality rate approaches 20%. And in the Amazon, where medical care is often hours or days away, severe dengue is frequently fatal. The mosquitoes that carry dengue breed in standing water, water that collects in discarded containers, in tire ruts, in the hollows of trees, in cisterns and barrels used for water storage. In settlements throughout the Amazon, dengue is endemic. It flares during rainy seasons when mosquito populations explode. Entire villages can be stricken simultaneously, leaving no one healthy enough to care for the sick. It's a disease of poverty, of limited infrastructure, of places where mosquito control is impossible or ineffective. Scientists who study emerging infectious diseases look at the Amazon with a mixture of fascination and fear. The rainforest represents one of the most likely birthplaces for future pandemics. The reasons are clear. Incredible biodiversity means countless potential viral and bacterial hosts. Close contact between humans and wildlife creates opportunities for spillover events when a pathogen jumps from animals to humans. Deforestation pushes human settlements deeper into previously untouched forest, increasing these contacts. And the region's connectivity to global travel networks means a new disease could spread worldwide before anyone realizes it exists. History supports this concern. Many of the world's most dangerous diseases originated in tropical rainforests. HIV likely jumped from primates to humans in African rainforests. Ebola emerged from the Congo Basin. SARS and other coronaviruses have origins in animals that live in densely forested regions. The pattern is clear and repeating. Dense forest environments create the conditions for viruses to evolve and adapt, and human encroachment creates the opportunities for transmission. The vast majority of emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic. They originate in animals before making the jump to humans. Bats are particularly concerning reservoirs. They carry numerous viruses that can infect humans, and they live in massive colonies throughout the Amazon, roosting in caves and hollow trees by the thousands. Their droppings accumulate on cave floors, creating concentrated viral repositories. Their echolocation and social behaviors mean they frequently exchange pathogens, and their ability to fly means they can spread diseases across vast distances rapidly. Rodents represent another major reservoir. The Amazon hosts hundreds of rodent species, many of which live near human settlements, attracted by stored food and shelter. They carry hantaviruses, arenaviruses, and various bacterial diseases. Their urine and feces contaminate surfaces, food, and water. Their fleas carry additional pathogens, and their reproductive rates mean they can maintain disease reservoirs indefinitely, creating permanent threats in areas where humans and rodents coexist. Venezuelan equine encephalitis remains highly endemic in parts of the Amazon basin. The virus is transmitted by mosquitoes and causes inflammation of the brain and spinal cord. Most human infections cause flu-like symptoms, but severe cases progress to neurological symptoms, seizures, paralysis, personality changes, coma. Children and elderly individuals are at highest risk for severe disease. And because the virus primarily circulates in horses and other equines, with periodic spillover into humans, it can explode into outbreaks when conditions favor mosquito reproduction and animal infection rates. The virus doesn't just disappear between outbreaks, it persists in animal populations, waiting for the right combination of weather, mosquito density, and susceptible hosts to spark another wave of human infections. And in areas where horses are essential for transportation and work, the virus creates a constant, looming threat that can devastate both animal herds and human populations simultaneously. Oropouche virus infects thousands of people each year across the Amazon region. The virus is transmitted by biting midges, tiny insects smaller than mosquitoes that breed in rotting vegetation and fruit. The disease causes sudden fever, severe headache, joint pain, and sometimes a rash. Most people recover, but the illness is debilitating, knocking victims down for days or weeks. And like dengue, Oropouche can cause more severe symptoms in subsequent infections. What makes Oropouche particularly concerning is its explosive outbreak potential. The virus can spread rapidly through communities when midge populations are high, infecting significant percentages of the population in short periods. And because the midges are so small, they're difficult to avoid. Mosquito nets don't stop them. Protective clothing doesn't fully prevent bites. They fly in swarms around dusk, seeking blood meals with persistent aggression. But perhaps the most personally horrifying parasites in the Amazon are even smaller. Tunga penetrans, commonly called jiggers or chigo fleas, burrow into human skin, particularly on the feet. The female flea digs into the skin, usually under toenails or between toes, where she embeds herself completely. Only her posterior end remains exposed to the air so she can breathe and release eggs. The flea swells as she feeds and produces eggs, growing from a tiny speck to the size of a pea. The surrounding tissue becomes inflamed, painful, and prone to secondary bacterial infection. Multiple fleas often infest the same foot, creating clusters of swollen, painful lesions that make Walking excruciating. In severe cases, the infection spread, causing cellulitis or even sepsis. Toes can be lost to necrosis. Feet become so damaged that walking becomes impossible, effectively crippling victims. Removal requires careful extraction with a sterile needle or blade, digging into the skin to remove the entire flea without breaking it apart. Breaking the flea inside the wound increases the risk of infection dramatically. And in communities where everyone walks barefoot, where reinfection is constant, jigger infestations become chronic problems that damage feet permanently over years of repeated infestation and infection. The diseases of the Amazon don't announce themselves with roars or fangs. They work silently, carried in the saliva of insects, in the water you drink, in the air you breathe. They incubate inside you, sometimes for days, sometimes for years, before revealing the damage they've done. They turn your own body against you, hijacking cells, destroying organs, leaving you permanently changed even if you survive. And unlike predators that you might see or avoid, these microscopic threats are everywhere, unavoidable, persistent. They make the Amazon dangerous not just in its visible violence, but in its invisible, patient destruction of anyone who enters unprepared. The complexity of disease transmission in the Amazon defies simple understanding. It's not just mosquitoes or contaminated water, it's an entire interconnected web of hosts, vectors, and environments that maintain countless parasitic infections in perpetual circulation. Multiple animal species act as reservoirs, living storage vessels for parasites that can infect humans. Rodents carry leishmaniasis. Opossums harbor Chagas parasites. Sloths, armadillos, and countless other mammals serve as hosts for various trypanosomes and other protozoans. These animals don't necessarily get sick. They've evolved alongside these parasites for millennia, reaching a kind of biological detente where the parasite survives without killing its host. But when humans enter the equation, we have no such evolutionary adaptation. The parasites that merely exist in animal reservoirs can devastate human bodies. And because the animal populations are so vast and diverse, the parasites can never be eliminated. They cycle through wildlife populations continuously, waiting for the opportunity to jump to human hosts through insect bites, contaminated food, or direct contact. This reservoir effect means that even if every human case of a disease were treated and cured, the disease would persist in the forest, ready to reemerge. It makes eradication impossible. The best anyone can hope for is management, avoidance, and treatment when infection occurs. The Amazon essentially functions as a permanent disease factory, with animal populations ensuring that pathogens never truly disappear. Arboviruses, viruses transmitted by arthropods like mosquitoes, ticks, and midges, circulate constantly through this system. Yellow fever, dengue, oropouche, Venezuelan equine encephalitis, Mayarovirus, and dozens of others cycle through insect and wildlife populations in an endless rotation. Birds carry some, rodents carry others, monkeys in the canopy harbor still more. The insects feed on these infected animals, then carry the viruses to new hosts, maintaining transmission chains that have existed for thousands of years. What makes this particularly insidious is that many of these viruses cause no symptoms in their natural hosts. A monkey infected with yellow fever might show no signs of illness whatsoever, yet its blood carries enough virus to infect dozens of mosquitoes. Those mosquitoes then bite humans, and the virus that was harmless in its adapted host becomes lethal in ours. The forest hums with viral traffic that we can't see, can't detect, until it's already inside us, replicating, overwhelming our immune systems with pathogens we never evolved to fight. Leishmaniasis deserves deeper examination for the sheer horror of what it does to human tissue. The disease is caused by Leishmania parasites transmitted through sandfly bites. Cutaneous leishmaniasis creates skin lesions, but the progression is nightmarish. The initial bite may be painless, easy to ignore. A small bump appears, which might look like any insect bite, but instead of healing, it grows. The center becomes ulcerated, creating a crater in the skin that exposes underlying tissue. The lesions can spread across the body, appearing wherever sandflies have bitten. They don't hurt the way you'd expect open wounds to hurt. The parasites seem to suppress normal pain responses in some cases, but they're deeply disfiguring. The wounds attract flies that lay eggs in the exposed flesh, causing myiasis, a secondary infestation of maggots that consume dying tissue. The combination of parasitic infection and fly larvae infestation creates wounds that never heal properly, that smell of decay, that mark victims as diseased and drive social isolation. Mucocutaneous leishmaniasis is even worse. The parasites migrate from skin lesions to mucous membranes, typically attacking the nose and mouth. The infection destroys cartilage and soft tissue progressively. The nasal septum, the wall dividing the nostrils, is consumed, creating a single large cavity. The palate can be destroyed, connecting the mouth to the nasal cavity. The lips are eaten away. Victims struggle to eat, to speak clearly, to breathe normally, and the destruction continues over months or years if untreated, reducing faces to grotesque masks of eroded tissue and scarring. Treatment exists, but it requires drugs that are toxic and difficult to tolerate, antimonial compounds that must be injected repeatedly over weeks. The side effects include severe joint pain, heart problems, and liver damage, and even with treatment, the scarring remains permanent. The Amazon marks those who contract leishmaniasis, branding them with visible proof of the forest's microscopic cruelty. Beneath the feet of anyone walking through Amazon soil, another threat waits in the dirt itself. Parasitic worms thrive in the warm, moist earth. Hookworms penetrate through the skin of bare feet, migrate through the body, and eventually settle in the intestines where they attach and feed on blood. Heavy infections cause severe anemia, weakness, and stunted development in children. Victims become chronically fatigued, unable to work or function normally, while the worms silently drain their blood meal by meal. Strongyloids is another soil-dwelling worm that penetrates skin. Unlike hookworms, strongyloids can complete its entire life cycle inside a human host, reinfecting the same person repeatedly through a process called autoinfection. The worms migrate through the lungs, causing respiratory symptoms and coughing. They live in the intestines, causing diarrhea and abdominal pain. And in people with weakened immune systems, the infection can explode into hyperinfection syndrome, where worms invade virtually every organ system, causing overwhelming sepsis and death. These soil-transmitted helminths are so common in some Amazon communities that infection is almost universal. Children play in dirt contaminated with worm eggs and larvae. Adults work in fields where the soil is teeming with parasites. The infections are chronic, lasting years or even decades, slowly draining vitality and health from entire populations. Deworming campaigns help, but reinfection rates are high when the environment itself serves as an inexhaustible reservoir of parasites. Filarial infections operate in near silence, spreading through communities without obvious symptoms until the damage becomes severe. These parasitic worms are transmitted by blood-feeding insects, mosquitoes and black flies primarily. The adult worms can live for years inside human hosts, reproducing and releasing millions of microscopic larvae into the bloodstream. These microfilariae circulate through the body, waiting for an insect to bite and pick them up, continuing the transmission cycle. The most visible consequence of filarial infection is lymphatic filariasis, which causes elephantiasis. The adult worms live in lymphatic vessels, where they obstruct the flow of lymph fluid. Over time, this obstruction causes massive swelling in the affected limbs, legs, arms, or genitals. The swelling can be grotesque, with limbs ballooning to several times their normal size, skin becoming thick and rough like elephant hide, hence the name. The condition is painful, disabling, and permanent. Those affected struggle to walk, to work, to maintain independence. But many filarial infections remain subclinical for years. The worms are there, reproducing, causing chronic inflammation and damage to organs and tissues, but producing no obvious symptoms. By the time the damage becomes apparent, whether through swelling, vision problems from onchocerciasis, or other complications, the infection has been present for years, and the harm is irreversible. Chagas disease, already terrifying enough through kissing bug transmission, has another vector that's perhaps even more insidious. The parasites can spread through contaminated food and beverages. particularly fresh fruit juices made from acai berries or sugar cane. The kissing bugs are attracted to these plants during harvest. They defecate on the fruit or in processing equipment. When the fruit is crushed or pressed for juice, the feces, laden with Trypanosoma cruzi parasites, mix into the product. Drinking contaminated juice causes acute Chagas infection. Unlike the chronic form that develops from insect transmission, oral transmission often causes severe, rapid onset disease. The parasite load is higher, the immune response is more intense. Victims experience high fever, severe fatigue, and sometimes immediate cardiac symptoms. Outbreaks have occurred where dozens of people attending the same event or consuming products from the same source all develop acute Chagas simultaneously. The terrifying aspect is that this contamination is nearly impossible to detect before consumption. The juice looks normal, tastes normal. There's no warning until the symptoms begin days later, and once consumed, there's no way to prevent the infection from establishing. The parasites enter through the mucous membranes of the mouth and throat, invade the bloodstream, and begin their lifelong colonization of cardiac and digestive tissues. A single contaminated glass of juice can lead to decades of chronic illness and eventual death from heart failure. Despite centuries of study and decades of intensive modern research, new pathogens are still being discovered in the Amazon with alarming regularity. Researchers collect blood samples from wildlife and find viruses that have never been documented. They culture bacteria from soil and water that have no known classification. They identify new species of parasites with life cycles that seem impossibly complex. Each discovery represents a potential threat. Something that has always existed in the forest but hasn't yet made the jump to human populations, or has but hasn't been recognized. Some of these discoveries are accidental. A researcher falls ill with mysterious symptoms that don't match any known disease. Blood samples reveal a novel pathogen. Genetic sequencing shows it's related to known viruses, but distinct enough to be classified as new. And suddenly there's another name on the list of Amazon diseases, another microscopic threat to document and fear. The implications are unsettling. If new pathogens are still being discovered after so much research, how many more remain unknown? How many viruses circulate in animal populations that we've never sampled? How many bacteria lurk in unexplored regions of the forest, waiting for the right conditions to encounter human hosts? The Amazon is so vast, so biodiverse, that comprehensive pathogen surveillance is impossible. We're mapping a tiny fraction of the disease landscape, and each expedition reveals how much more remains hidden. Wildlife trafficking creates artificial bridges for these pathogens to cross. When animals are captured from the wild and transported to markets, to private collections, to other countries, they carry their parasites and viruses with them. Animals from different regions of the Amazon, animals that would never naturally encounter each other, are crammed together in cages, in trucks, in holding facilities. Their parasites mix. Viruses jump between species that have no evolutionary history together, creating opportunities for new combinations, new adaptations. A monkey carrying one virus might be caged next to a rodent carrying another. An insect in the shipment might bite both animals, picking up and mixing genetic material from different pathogens. When these trafficked animals reach their destinations, they may carry entirely new disease threats, hybrid pathogens that combine traits from multiple sources. And if any of these new combinations can infect humans, wildlife trafficking may have just seeded the next pandemic in a city thousands of miles from the Amazon. Even legal wildlife research can create these risks. Capturing animals for study, transporting samples, housing wildlife in research facilities, all of these activities bring humans into close contact with potential pathogens. Researchers take precautions, but accidents happen. Needle sticks occur, animals bite, cages break. And in those moments, a virus that has existed safely in the forest for millennia might find its way into a human host, where it begins adapting to its new environment. Deforestation amplifies all of these risks exponentially. As forests are cleared for agriculture, for mining, for logging, the animals that once lived deep in the forest are pushed into closer contact with humans. Bats roost in farm buildings instead of hollow trees. Rodents invade newly built homes. Mosquitoes that once fed exclusively on forest animals now have access to human blood meals. The careful ecological separation that kept many diseases confined to wildlife breaks down. The numbers are stark. Studies have shown direct correlations between deforestation rates and malaria incidence. As forest cover decreases, malaria cases increase. The same pattern holds for other vector-borne diseases. The insects that carry these pathogens thrive in the disturbed, fragmented habitats that result from deforestation. Standing water in cleared areas provides breeding sites. Increased sunlight warms pools that were previously shaded, allowing mosquito larvae to develop faster. And the human settlements that drive into newly cleared forest are typically poor, lacking infrastructure, lacking healthcare access, lacking the resources to implement disease control measures. People live in structures that don't exclude insects. They work in fields where exposure to soil parasites is constant. They drink water from sources that may be contaminated. They exist in the worst possible conditions for disease transmission, surrounded by displaced wildlife that carries an arsenal of pathogens, serviced by exploding insect populations that bridge the gap between animal reservoirs and human victims. Perhaps the most discouraging reality about Amazonian tropical illnesses is that many of them still have no cure. Treatments exist for some diseases, antivirals for some infections, antiparasitics for others, supportive care to manage symptoms. But cure? Actual elimination of the pathogen and restoration of health? For many diseases, that remains impossible. Chagas disease in its chronic stage cannot be cured. The damage to the heart is permanent. Leishmaniasis treatment is brutal and doesn't always work. Filarial infections can be treated to kill adult worms, but the damage to lymphatic systems persists. Many viral infections have no specific treatments at all. You suffer through the acute phase and hope you're among the survivors, knowing the virus may have caused subtle organ damage that will affect you for the rest of your life. This medical helplessness adds another layer of dread to the Amazon's disease burden. You can take precautions, use insect repellent, avoid certain areas, drink treated water. But if something gets through your defenses, if you contract one of the incurable diseases, the best modern medicine can offer is management. Not cure, not restoration, just slowing the progression, treating the symptoms, and watching as the disease runs its inevitable course through your body. And research into cures progresses slowly. Many of these diseases primarily affect poor populations in developing countries. Pharmaceutical companies have little financial incentive to develop treatments for diseases that mostly kill people who can't afford expensive medications. The drugs that do exist are often old, toxic, and barely effective. Newer, better treatments remain hypothetical, stuck in the early stages of research or abandoned entirely when clinical trials prove too expensive or complicated to justify the potential return on investment. So the diseases persist. They circulate through the forest, through animal populations, through human communities. They evolve, adapt, persist despite our best efforts at control. The Amazon harbors them the way it harbors everything else, indifferently, abundantly, with a patient cruelty that operates on timescales far longer than human lifespans. The forest was here before us, it will be here after us, and its diseases will continue their ancient cycles, waiting for the next host, the next victim, the next opportunity to demonstrate that in the Amazon, we are not the dominant species. We're just another potential reservoir, another temporary host in an eternal chain of infection and transmission. But the dangers don't end with creatures and microbes. The plants themselves, silent, rooted, seemingly passive, have evolved some of the most potent chemical weapons on Earth. The Amazon's vegetation has been refining toxins for millions of years, developing compounds so effective at deterring predators that even brief contact can cause paralysis, burns, or death. Indigenous peoples understood this intimacy with poison. They didn't just observe these plants from a distance, they learned to harvest them, to concentrate their toxins, to weaponize them with sophisticated knowledge passed down through generations. Some Amazonian plants were used to create arrow poisons that killed almost instantly, When a hunter's dart pierced skin, the victim had only seconds or minutes before the toxin shut down their nervous system. The prey would stumble, collapse, and die where it fell, often before it could run more than a few yards. This wasn't crude poisoning. It was precision chemistry, developed over centuries of careful experimentation to find the perfect balance. Lethal to prey, but leaving the meat safe to eat once the animal was dead. The curare vine produces one of the most infamous of these toxins. Curare is a general term for various plant-derived poisons used by indigenous groups, but many come from chondrodendron species and related vines. The preparation process is complex and dangerous. The bark and stems are scraped, boiled, and reduced into a thick, syrupy paste. This concentrate contains alkaloids that block nerve signals at the neuromuscular junction, the point where nerves tell muscles to contract. When curare enters the bloodstream through a wound, it spreads rapidly. Within minutes, the victim experiences weakness. The limbs stop responding properly. Breathing becomes difficult as the diaphragm and chest muscles fail. The heart continues beating, but without the ability to breathe. Death comes from suffocation. The victim remains conscious throughout much of this process, aware of their paralysis, feeling their lungs refuse to draw air, experiencing the terror of suffocation while fully alert. It's a horrifying death, made worse by the fact that the poison leaves no avenue for escape once it's in the blood. Modern medicine has found uses for curare derivatives. They're used as muscle relaxants during surgery, carefully dosed to paralyze patients while machines breathe for them. But in the forest, administered through a dart or arrow, curare is purely a weapon, efficient, reliable, and terrifying in its effectiveness. Brugmansia, known commonly as angel's trumpet, grows throughout the Amazon with large, pendulous flowers that hang like bells. The flowers are beautiful, white, yellow, pink, often fragrant. But every part of the plant contains tropane alkaloids, including scopolamine and atropine. These compounds affect the central nervous system, causing hallucinations, delirium, and, in large doses, death. Indigenous shamans have used brugmansia in ritual preparations for vision quests and spiritual ceremonies. The dosing requires extreme precision. Too little, and the effect is minimal. Too much, and the recipient dies in a state of confused delirium, their heart racing, their body overheating, their mind fractured by hallucinations that feel completely real. The plant doesn't just poison the body, it poisons perception itself, making victims unable to distinguish reality from nightmare. In cases of brugmansia poisoning, victims often behave bizarrely before dying. They see people who aren't there, have conversations with empty air, experience complete dissociation from their surroundings. The pupils dilate fully, unable to constrict even in bright light. The mouth becomes dry as salivation stops. The heart races uncontrollably. Seizures may occur. And if the dose is high enough, the heart simply stops, overwhelmed by the alkaloid barrage assaulting its electrical system. What makes brugmansia particularly insidious is that the flowers smell sweet and attractive. Children have been poisoned by playing with the flowers, putting them near their faces to smell them, getting pollen or sap on their hands, and then touching their mouths. The plant doesn't advertise its danger the way poison dart frogs do with bright colors. It attracts with beauty, then destroys with chemistry. But perhaps no plant in the Amazon, or anywhere on Earth, matches the comprehensive toxicity of the manchineel tree. Hippomene mancinella grows in coastal areas and river edges throughout Central and South America, including parts of the Amazon basin. The Spanish called it manzanilla de la muerte, little apple of death. Every part of this tree is weaponized: the bark, the leaves, the sap, the fruit. All of it contains phorbol, a powerful irritant and toxin. The manchineel produces small apple-like fruits that smell sweet and look edible. They are not. Biting into manchineel fruit causes immediate, intense burning in the mouth and throat. The tissues swell rapidly, potentially blocking the airway and causing death by asphyxiation. The tongue swells to the point of immobility. Blisters form throughout the mouth and esophagus. Swallowing becomes impossible. And if any of the fruit is actually swallowed, the digestive tract is damaged by the foreball toxins, causing severe internal bleeding and potentially fatal gastrointestinal hemorrhage. Touching the tree's sap causes equally severe reactions. The milky latex that oozes from any damaged bark contains concentrated foreball. Contact with skin causes immediate burning pain, followed within hours by severe blistering. The blisters are large, fluid-filled, and excruciating. They can cover entire limbs if exposure was extensive. Secondary infection is common as the blisters rupture, leaving raw, weeping wounds. If the sap contacts eyes, which can happen when people try to wipe sweat from their faces after touching the tree, temporary or permanent blindness can result. The corneas are chemically burned, scarred beyond the body's ability to repair. People have been blinded simply by rubbing their eyes after standing near a manchineel tree on a windy day, when microscopic droplets of sap carried on the breeze settled on their skin. And the danger doesn't require direct contact. Standing beneath a manchineel tree during rain can poison you through simple proximity. When rainwater washes over the leaves and bark, it picks up foreball toxins. This contaminated water drips onto anyone sheltering beneath the tree, causing burns and blistering wherever it touches skin. Stories tell of entire military units in centuries past taking shelter under manchineel trees during tropical storms, only to emerge covered in chemical burns, some blinded, some suffering from exposure so severe they died from the resulting infections and complications. Indigenous peoples marked manchineel trees with warnings. They knew to give them wide berth, to never use the wood for fires. Burning manchineel releases toxic smoke that can cause severe respiratory damage and blindness if the smoke contacts eyes. Even the ash is toxic. The tree is so dangerous that in some areas they've been systematically removed from places where tourists or uninformed people might encounter them. But in the deep forest, they remain silent sentinels of botanical warfare. Certain other plants cause severe burns from contact, so brief you might not even realize you've touched them until the pain begins. The stinging tree, found in some parts of the Amazon basin, is covered in fine hairs that act like hypodermic needles. The slightest brush against leaves or stems drives these hairs into skin, where they inject a potent neurotoxin. The pain is immediate and intense, described as being sprayed with hot acid while simultaneously being electrocuted. The pain can last for weeks or even months. It comes in waves, intensifying with water contact, with temperature changes, with no predictable pattern. People stung by these plants have reported pain so severe they've considered or attempted amputation of the affected limb. The toxin remains in skin for extended periods, and the microscopic hairs embed so deeply they're nearly impossible to remove completely. Each hair continues injecting toxin as long as it remains in the skin, creating a long-term source of agony. Some vines in the Amazon trigger paralysis through dermal contact alone. Their sap contains alkaloids similar to those in curare, but these plants don't need to enter the bloodstream through a wound. The toxins can penetrate intact skin, absorbing through the dermal layers and entering the bloodstream gradually. Workers clearing forest land have experienced progressive numbness and weakness after handling certain vines, not realizing they were being poisoned until their hands stopped responding, until their legs began to fail. The paralysis develops slowly compared to arrow poison, but it's no less dangerous. By the time symptoms are recognized, significant quantities of toxin have already entered the body, and in remote areas without medical facilities, there's no treatment. The affected person simply has to wait, hoping the paralysis doesn't progress to respiratory muscles, hoping their body can metabolize the toxin faster than it's being absorbed. Some recover fully, others suffer permanent nerve damage, left with weakness or numbness that never fully resolves. Other plants induce respiratory failure through volatile compounds released into the air around them. These plants don't need to be touched or consumed. Simply breathing near them can be dangerous. The compounds interfere with the respiratory centers in the brain stem, gradually suppressing the automatic drive to breathe. Victims become short of breath without understanding why. They feel like they're suffocating despite being in open air. If exposure continues, breathing becomes increasingly shallow and irregular until it stops entirely. These volatile toxins are particularly dangerous because they're invisible and odorless in many cases. A person might rest against a tree or sit near a plant, gradually breathing in toxins without any warning. By the time symptoms appear, they may be too weak and confused to move away from the source, and if they lose consciousness while still in the toxic zone, death is nearly certain unless someone finds them and drags them to clean air. The chemical sophistication of Amazonian plants rivals or exceeds the venom of the forest's most dangerous animals. Snake venom is complex, containing dozens of proteins and enzymes, but plant toxins can be equally intricate. Some plants produce compounds that are neurotoxins, cardiotoxins, and cytotoxins simultaneously, poisons that attack multiple body systems at once. Others generate alkaloids so structurally unique that chemists struggle to synthesize them in laboratories, even with modern technology. Plants have advantages in chemical warfare that animals don't. They can't run, can't fight, can't hide. Their only defense is chemistry, and they've had hundreds of millions of years to perfect it. The result is an arsenal of compounds that can kill in dozens of different ways, stopping hearts, paralyzing muscles, destroying tissue, inducing hallucinations so severe that victims die from their own confused actions while under the plant's influence. And unlike venom, which must be delivered through a bite or sting, plant toxins can be absorbed through skin, inhaled, or ingested accidentally. They're passive weapons, requiring no action from the plant except to exist and be touched. An animal with venom makes a choice to use it. A plant with toxins is always armed, always dangerous, always ready to punish any creature that makes contact. The Amazon's vegetation exists in constant chemical warfare with herbivores, with fungi, with competing plants. Every species is armed. Every leaf, every root, every flower is potentially weaponized with compounds designed to deter, harm, or kill. Humans entering this environment encounter plant defenses we never evolved to handle, toxins our bodies have no natural resistance to, chemical weapons refined across evolutionary timescales we can barely comprehend. This is why indigenous knowledge is so crucial. These peoples learned through careful observation and experimentation, sometimes fatal experimentation, which plants could be used, which must be avoided, which could be processed into useful tools or medicines. They mapped the chemical landscape of the forest through generations of accumulated experience. Without that knowledge, the forest is a minefield of botanical hazards, each plant a potential threat that reveals its danger only after contact has been made. The plants don't care about intent. They don't distinguish between a curious touch and an aggressive attempt to consume them. They simply deploy their chemical defenses automatically, indiscriminately, with the same patient lethality as the forest's predators. In a rainforest where everything competes for survival, where death comes in countless forms, the plants remind us that danger doesn't require teeth or claws or venom glands. Sometimes it just requires chemistry, time, and the perfect molecular structure to destroy tissue, paralyze muscles, or stop a beating heart. And yet, for all we've documented about the Amazon's dangers, for all the species cataloged and toxins identified, we've barely scratched the surface. Vast regions of the Amazon remain unexplored in any meaningful scientific sense. There are areas where no researcher has ever set foot, where the only human presence comes from isolated indigenous groups who've lived there for generations, but have no contact with the outside world. These regions exist as blanks on detailed maps, marked only with topographical data gathered from satellites, their actual contents a mystery. The numbers are staggering when you consider them fully. The Amazon basin covers roughly 2.1 million square miles. That's an area nearly the size of the continental United States, most of it covered in dense rainforest that makes ground travel extremely difficult. Even with modern technology, with GPS and satellite imagery and aircraft, huge swaths remain unexplored. And exploration doesn't mean a quick survey from a helicopter. True exploration requires boots on the ground, researchers spending weeks or months in remote areas, cataloging species, collecting samples, documenting what actually lives there. Most exploration focuses on accessible areas, regions near rivers, near existing settlements, near established research stations. But between these investigated zones lie enormous stretches of primary forest that remain virtually untouched by scientific study. The logistics of reaching these areas are prohibitive. The costs are enormous. The risks to researchers are significant, so they remain unknown, their secrets held in the shadows beneath the canopy. Thousands of plant species are still unknown to science. Conservative estimates suggest we've cataloged perhaps 60 to 70% of Amazonian plant species, but that means 30 to 40% remain undocumented, unclassified, unstudied. Each of these unknown species represents potential discoveries, new medicines, new toxins, new ecological relationships we've never observed, or they represent nothing remarkable, just another variation on familiar themes. But we won't know until someone finds them, catalogs them, studies them in detail. And plant discovery requires more than just seeing a plant. It requires collecting proper specimens, examining them under magnification, comparing them against existing species descriptions, often conducting genetic analysis to confirm they're truly novel. This process takes time and expertise. A single research expedition might return with dozens or hundreds of plant samples that require years of careful study to process fully. The backlog of undescribed species sitting in herbarium collections around the world is substantial. We're discovering faster than we can fully document. The forest canopy, the upper layer where trees spread their crowns and most biodiversity concentrates, remains remarkably mysterious. Scientists have better maps of the Martian surface than they do of the Amazonian canopy. Mars has been extensively photographed and mapped by satellites and rovers. We know its topography in detail. We can identify features and formations with precision. But the Amazon canopy is a three-dimensional environment hidden beneath itself, layer upon layer of branches and leaves, most of it inaccessible from the ground and difficult to study from above. Canopy research requires specialized equipment and techniques, climbing harnesses, platforms suspended from balloons or cranes, drones equipped with cameras and sensors. Even with these tools, studying the canopy is dangerous, difficult work. Researchers working hundreds of feet above the ground in swaying trees, surrounded by insects and exposed to weather, trying to catalog species and observe behaviors. The view from above reveals only the top layer. Everything below remains hidden in shadow, and the canopy is where much of the forest's life concentrates. Many species spend their entire lives in the upper reaches, never descending to the ground. Birds, insects, mammals, amphibians, reptiles, all evolved to exploit the resources available in the treetops. Entire ecosystems exist in the canopy that we've only begun to understand. New species are discovered there regularly, sometimes in areas that have been studied for decades, simply because they live in microhabitats that researchers hadn't examined closely enough. For a period spanning roughly a decade, scientists were discovering new species in the Amazon every few days on average. This wasn't an exaggeration or estimate. The actual pace of discovery was that rapid. New insects, new plants, new fish, new amphibians, occasionally new mammals or reptiles. Each expedition returned with findings that expanded our catalog of Amazonian biodiversity, and this rate of discovery hasn't slowed significantly. It continues year after year, expedition after expedition, each revealing species that were always there but unknown to science. This constant discovery underscores how little we truly know. If we're still finding new species at this rate after more than a century of intensive biological research, how much remains undiscovered? How many species exist in unexplored regions? How many live in ecological niches we haven't thought to investigate? The Amazon may contain millions of species we've never documented. Some estimates suggest we've identified less than half of what actually exists there. Entire areas of the Amazon remain unmapped at any useful scale. Satellite imagery provides overview perspectives, showing rivers and large features. But detailed topographical maps that show terrain variation, water sources, vegetation types at ground level, these don't exist for vast regions. Indigenous peoples who live in these areas know their territories intimately, but their knowledge isn't recorded in forms accessible to outsiders. They navigate by landmarks and learned routes, carrying mental maps built through experience. For anyone entering these unmapped regions without local guides, the risk of becoming lost is extreme. Without accurate maps, without GPS coordinates for important features, with dense vegetation blocking sightlines beyond a few dozen feet, orientation becomes nearly impossible. The forest all looks the same: trees, undergrowth, shadows. Rivers meander in ways that make them unreliable navigation aids. The sun is often invisible through the canopy. Getting lost in these areas can be fatal. Search and rescue operations in unmapped jungle have almost no chance of success. No one knows with certainty how much of the Amazon remains uncharted. Estimates vary wildly depending on how you define charted. If charted means basic satellite imagery exists, then most of the Amazon has been charted. If it means detailed maps with ground verified data exist, then huge portions remain uncharted. If it means scientists have conducted thorough biological surveys, then the uncharted percentage increases dramatically. The Amazon is simultaneously one of the most studied ecosystems on Earth and one of the least known. This uncertainty extends to biodiversity itself. We don't know how many species exist in the Amazon. We can estimate based on sampling and extrapolation, but the actual number remains unknown, and this creates a deeply troubling possibility. Species may be going extinct before we ever discover they exist. Deforestation continues at alarming rates in many parts of the Amazon. Thousands of square miles of forest are cleared annually for agriculture, for cattle ranching, for logging, for development. Each cleared area represents habitat loss, and for species with limited ranges, particularly those adapted to specific microhabitats, habitat loss can mean extinction. A species might exist in one particular valley, or along one specific type of stream, or in association with one particular plant species. Clear that valley, and the species is gone forever. We never knew it existed. We have no specimens in collections, no photographs, no DNA samples. It simply vanishes, leaving no trace. This silent extinction is likely happening constantly. Estimates suggest dozens or potentially hundreds of species may be disappearing before science can document them. Each represents lost knowledge, lost potential for medical discoveries, lost understanding of evolutionary processes, their evolutionary experiments millions of years in the making, snuffed out in an afternoon by a chainsaw or bulldozer, their existence never recorded, never mourned, never even noticed. The isolation that makes the Amazon difficult to study also makes it extraordinarily dangerous for anyone who becomes injured or ill there. Medical help can be hundreds of miles away from remote research sites or indigenous territories. If someone suffers a serious injury, a snake bite, a fall, an infection, evacuation is difficult and time-consuming. In many areas, the only way out is by boat down winding rivers that might take days to navigate, or by helicopter if weather permits and if one can reach the area. This distance from medical care transforms survivable injuries into potentially fatal ones. A broken leg that would be a minor inconvenience near a hospital becomes life-threatening deep in the jungle. Venomous bites that could be treated with anti-venom become death sentences when the nearest anti-venom is hours or days away. Infections that would respond quickly to antibiotics become septic and overwhelming when treatment is delayed. The forest is unforgiving of human fragility, and modern medicine's ability to save lives diminishes rapidly with distance from infrastructure. Researchers working in remote areas carry emergency medical supplies, satellite phones for communication, and have evacuation plans prepared. But plans mean little when weather grounds helicopters, when rising rivers make boat travel impossible, when the patient is too injured to move without risking further harm. People have died in the Amazon from injuries and illnesses that would be easily survivable elsewhere, simply because help couldn't reach them in time. The dense canopy that creates such rich biodiversity also blocks aerial observation in ways that seem almost deliberate. From above, the forest presents an unbroken green ceiling, Satellite imagery and aerial photography reveal the top layer of vegetation, but everything below is invisible. Rivers appear as dark lines winding through green. Clearings stand out as breaks in the canopy. But the actual forest floor, the understory where most human activity occurs, remains hidden. This makes aerial search and rescue nearly impossible. A lost person could be directly beneath a searching aircraft and remain invisible. The canopy is too dense, too continuous. Even large structures can be hidden beneath the trees, and this has been proven dramatically in recent years. Ancient settlements, some covering substantial areas, have been discovered beneath the forest canopy through advanced radar imaging that can penetrate vegetation to map ground contours. These settlements challenge our understanding of pre-Columbian Amazon history. For decades, scholars believed the Amazon was too hostile, too poor in resources to support large permanent settlements. The forest was considered an environment humans passed through but didn't substantially inhabit or modify. But the discovery of these ancient settlements, some with evidence of significant populations, organized agriculture, and sophisticated earthworks, has overturned that view completely. The settlements were invisible until radar mapping revealed them. The jungle had reclaimed these sites so thoroughly that no surface evidence remained visible. Trees grew where plazas once stood. Vines covered ancient walls. The forest consumed human presence so completely that it erased centuries of habitation, leaving no trace visible to conventional observation. Only technology capable of seeing through the canopy revealed what was hidden there, and these discoveries continue. Each year, new findings emerge. New settlements, new earthworks, new evidence of ancient human presence. Each discovery raises questions about what else remains hidden. If substantial settlements can be concealed beneath the canopy, completely invisible until specialized imaging reveals them, what else is hidden there? What other evidence of past civilizations? What natural features or phenomena remain undiscovered simply because we can't see through the layers of vegetation? The Amazon keeps secrets with an efficiency that borders on malice. It hides species, hides terrain, hides evidence of human history. It reveals information reluctantly, only when approached with the right tools and techniques, only when researchers commit significant time and resources to looking in exactly the right places. And for every question answered, for every discovery made, 10 more questions emerge. The forest seems inexhaustible in its capacity to surprise us, to reveal that what we thought we knew was incomplete or incorrect. This fundamental unknowability adds another dimension to the Amazon's danger. You can't prepare for threats you don't know exist. You can't avoid areas that aren't mapped. You can't identify species that haven't been documented. The forest is dangerous in known ways: venomous creatures, toxic plants, diseases. But it's also dangerous in unknown ways. There are threats we haven't discovered yet, species we haven't cataloged, dangers we haven't imagined, and until we explore more thoroughly, until we map more comprehensively, until we document more completely, those unknown dangers remain hidden in the green shadows, waiting to be discovered by someone unfortunate or curious enough to encounter them first. But perhaps the most terrifying fact about the Amazon isn't what lives within it, or what remains hidden beneath its canopy. It's what we're doing to it. The Amazon has already lost nearly a fifth of its forest cover. One-fifth, gone, cleared for agriculture, logged for timber, burned to create pasture land. An area larger than the entire state of Texas has been stripped away, converted from rainforest into something else: farms, cattle ranches, soy plantations, degraded scrubland that will never recover. This isn't ancient history. This loss has occurred mostly within the last 50 years, accelerating in recent decades despite international awareness and concern. Satellite imagery documents the progression with brutal clarity. Year by year, the green expanse shrinks. Roads push deeper into previously untouched regions. Clearings appear and expand. Rivers that once flowed through continuous forest now cut through fragmented landscapes of isolated forest patches, separated by cleared land. And the forest that remains is changing in ways that threaten its very existence. The Amazon, which for millions of years has been one of Earth's most important carbon sinks, absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it in vegetation and soil, is now releasing massive amounts of carbon back into the atmosphere. The balance has shifted. In some regions, the forest is no longer absorbing more carbon than it releases. It's become a net carbon source, contributing to climate change rather than mitigating it. This transformation represents a fundamental breakdown in one of the planet's critical regulatory systems. The Amazon was supposed to be our ally in the fight against climate change, continuously pulling carbon from the air, storing it away in billions of tons of living wood. But we've damaged it so severely that it can no longer perform this function effectively. The trees that remain are stressed by rising temperatures, by altered rainfall patterns, by fragmentation that changes microclimates and makes forests more vulnerable to drought and fire. Fires have become a catastrophic problem. Some are natural, sparked by lightning, but most are deliberately set to clear land, to convert forest into agricultural space. And these fires don't stay contained. They spread into intact forest, particularly during dry seasons when vegetation becomes tinder dry. Massive fires rage for weeks or months, consuming thousands of square miles, killing wildlife, destroying biodiversity that took millions of years to develop. The smoke from these fires is visible from space, vast plumes that darken the sky over entire regions. Cities hundreds of miles from the fires are choked with smoke, the air becoming hazardous to breathe, the sun appearing as a dull red disk through the haze, and the carbon released from these fires is staggering. In bad years, fires emit more carbon dioxide than the entire remaining forest can absorb through photosynthesis. The Amazon becomes a net carbon emitter, pouring greenhouse gases into an atmosphere already dangerously overloaded. This isn't a temporary setback that can be reversed with a good rainy season. Each fire changes the forest in ways that make future fires more likely. The burned areas don't immediately regenerate into rainforest. They become grassland or scrubland, dry and fire-prone. The edges of intact forest become drier as the protective humidity and shade are lost. The forest fragments and fragmented forest is more vulnerable to drought, more likely to burn, more likely to die. Deforestation continues yearly, despite pledges and initiatives meant to slow or stop it. The economic pressures are enormous. There's money in cleared land, in the cattle it can support, in the soy it can grow, in the timber extracted before burning. For impoverished communities, the forest represents an obstacle to economic development. For wealthy landowners and corporations, it represents untapped profit. The immediate economic gains of deforestation outweigh abstract concerns about climate or biodiversity for those making decisions about whether to clear another acre, another 1,000 acres. And enforcement of protection laws is difficult at best, impossible at worst. The Amazon is vast, remote, and covers multiple countries with varying levels of governmental control and resources. Illegal deforestation happens in areas where authorities rarely or never patrol. By the time satellite imagery reveals new clearing, the damage is done. Trees are gone, land is converted, and prosecuting those responsible is difficult when they're operating in lawless frontier regions far from effective governmental oversight. The rain cycles that have defined the Amazon for millennia are breaking down. The forest generates much of its own rainfall through evapotranspiration, water drawn up through roots, transported through trees, released from leaves into the atmosphere where it condenses and falls again as rain. This creates a self-sustaining system where the forest waters itself, maintaining the constant humidity that allows rainforest ecosystems to thrive. But this cycle requires sufficient forest cover to function. As deforestation progresses, as the forest shrinks and fragments, evapotranspiration decreases. Less water enters the atmosphere. Less rain falls. The remaining forest becomes drier. Trees stressed by reduced rainfall are more vulnerable to fire, to disease, to drought-induced die-off. And as more trees die, evapotranspiration decreases further. The cycle accelerates in the wrong direction, a feedback loop of desiccation that could transform rainforest into something fundamentally different. Scientists have identified tipping points beyond which this transformation may become irreversible. The Amazon risks becoming a permanent carbon source rather than a sink, Once certain thresholds are crossed, certain percentages of deforestation, certain increases in temperature, certain reductions in rainfall, the forest may not be able to maintain itself even if all deforestation stopped immediately. The system would be too damaged, the feedback loops too entrenched, the climate too altered. Some regions are already showing signs of this transformation. Parts of the Amazon are drying into savanna, open grassland with scattered trees rather than dense rainforest. This isn't natural savanna that existed before, it's degraded forest, transformed by the combination of deforestation, fire, and climate change, into an ecosystem that cannot support the biodiversity that once thrived there. The trees that defined the rainforest are gone, replaced by grasses and hardy shrubs, adapted to drier conditions. This savannahization represents an ecological catastrophe. The species adapted to rainforest cannot survive in savanna. The birds that need dense canopy, the insects that depend on specific plants, the mammals that forage in understory vegetation, all of these disappear as their habitat transforms. And the transformation seems to be accelerating. Areas that were intact forest a decade ago are now transitional zones, shifting toward savanna as each dry season becomes more severe, as each fire season causes more damage. Rising temperatures threaten not just the Amazon, but every species within it, including humans who depend on the forest. As global temperatures increase, the Amazon warms disproportionately. The effects compound. Higher temperatures increase evaporation, which dries soil and vegetation. Drier vegetation is more fire-prone. Fires release carbon, which drives further warming. Warming alters rainfall patterns, bringing longer dry seasons. Longer dry seasons stress trees and increase fire risk. Each element amplifies the others in a cascade of deterioration. For the indigenous peoples who've lived in the Amazon for thousands of years, these changes threaten their survival in the most literal sense. Their traditional knowledge is adapted to a specific type of forest with predictable seasonal patterns. As those patterns break down, as familiar plant species die or migrate, as game animals disappear or change their ranges, the accumulated wisdom of generations becomes less applicable. Hunting and gathering strategies that worked for centuries may no longer provide sufficient food. Water sources may fail. The forest they knew is becoming something else, something their ancestors never prepared them to navigate. And for the isolated tribes who've chosen to avoid contact with the outside world, climate change and deforestation may force encounters they've successfully avoided for generations. As their territories shrink, as resources become scarcer, as fires and development push into previously untouched areas, maintaining isolation becomes increasingly difficult. These tribes face a terrible choice: maintain their isolation and risk starvation or death from environmental change, or make contact with the outside world and risk the diseases, cultural disruption, and exploitation that contact often brings. Illegal mining has exploded throughout the Amazon in recent years. Gold mining in particular has metastasized into a vast, destructive industry operating largely outside any regulatory framework. Thousands of illegal mines scar the forest, created by prospectors using heavy machinery to excavate riverbanks and forest floor, processing tons of sediment to extract tiny quantities of gold. The environmental damage is staggering: entire hillsides stripped of vegetation, rivers turned into muddy channels, forest converted into cratered wastelands of exposed earth and contaminated water. But the physical destruction is only part of the damage. Gold mining requires mercury to separate gold from sediment. Miners use mercury in quantities that would be shocking if the scale were fully known. Tons of the toxic metal poured into the Amazon ecosystem annually. Mercury binds to gold, allowing it to be extracted from the surrounding material. But much of the mercury is lost in the process, released into waterways where it begins its insidious work. Mercury contamination spreads through river systems with terrifying efficiency. The element doesn't break down or become less toxic over time. It persists in the environment indefinitely, accumulating in sediment, being taken up by microorganisms, entering the food chain at the lowest levels. Small fish absorb mercury from contaminated water and sediment. Larger fish eat the smaller fish, concentrating the mercury in their tissues. Humans and other top predators eat. The large fish, receiving doses of mercury that have been concentrated through multiple levels of the food chain. The health effects of mercury poisoning are severe and irreversible. Mercury attacks the nervous system, causing tremors, loss of coordination, cognitive impairment, and personality changes. In pregnant women, mercury crosses the placental barrier and damages fetal brain development, causing learning disabilities, developmental delays, and permanent neurological damage. Communities that depend on fish as a primary protein source are being systematically poisoned, often without realizing it until symptoms become severe. Testing has revealed mercury contamination in fish throughout vast stretches of Amazonian rivers, hundreds of miles downstream from mining operations. Indigenous communities with no direct involvement in mining are being poisoned because they eat fish from contaminated waterways. Children are born with elevated mercury levels. Adults show signs of neurological damage. And because mercury persists in the environment, this contamination will continue affecting people for decades, even if all mining stopped tomorrow. The mining operations themselves are often controlled by criminal organizations, operating with violence and impunity in remote areas where governmental authority is weak or absent. Miners work in dangerous conditions, exposed to mercury vapor during gold processing, living in makeshift camps with no safety standards or health care. When these camps are established, they attract other illegal activities: drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, human trafficking. Remote mining areas become lawless zones where violence is common and exploitation is the norm. Environmental defenders who oppose illegal mining face threats, violence, and assassination. Activists, indigenous leaders, government officials trying to enforce protection laws, all have been targeted by mining interests willing to use lethal force to protect their illegal operations. The Amazon has become one of the most dangerous places on Earth for environmental activism. People who speak out against deforestation and mining do so knowing they may be killed for their efforts. The tragedy is that we know what's happening. We have satellite data showing deforestation in real time. We have scientific studies documenting the carbon balance shift, the rainfall changes, the mercury contamination. We understand the feedback loops that could transform the Amazon into savanna. We know the tipping points we're approaching. The information exists. The warnings have been issued. But the destruction continues because stopping it requires political will, international cooperation, and economic sacrifices that prove difficult to achieve. The Amazon is dying in front of us. Not from natural causes, not from inevitable processes, but from deliberate human actions driven by short-term economic interests and enabled by inadequate enforcement of protective measures. Each year that passes with continued high rates of deforestation brings us closer to irreversible transformation. The forest that has existed for millions of years, that houses more biodiversity than any other terrestrial ecosystem, that regulates climate for the entire planet, this forest may not survive the century in any form resembling what it was. And if the Amazon fails, if it transforms from rainforest to savanna, from carbon sink to carbon source, the consequences extend far beyond South America. The Amazon influences global weather patterns. It drives rainfall in regions thousands of miles away. Its carbon storage has been essential to maintaining atmospheric carbon at levels compatible with current civilization.